life for 8 million low-paid families in Britain who are just about managing is unlikely to improve over the next few years, a new report warns. The Resolution Foundation think tank said average incomes are set to rise before the next general election, but households on low and middle incomes face flat or falling living standards until 2020. Woman trying to rescue cat up tree has to call 999 after getting stuck herself. It suggests Britain is facing its first sustained rise in inequality since the late 1980s, the report said. Welfare cuts of £14 billion won't be matched by rises in minimum wage and predicted pay increases for families receiving in-work benefits, the foundation's director said. In her opening speech in Downing Street following the general election, Theresa May spoke about these low-paid families as just about managing to avoid poverty. If you're from an ordinary working-class family, life is much harder than many people in Westminster realise, she said. You have a job, but you don't always have job security. You have your own home, but you worry about paying a mortgage. You can just about manage, but you worry about the cost of living and getting your kids into a good school. To view this video, please enable JavaScript, and consider upgrading to a web browser that supports HTML5 video. According to the Resolution Foundation, it includes 8 million working-age households on low to middle incomes. They are spread across the country from areas as diverse as Pendle in Lancashire, Sandwell in the Midlands and North Devon. They are not always low-income families. People on a salary of £50,000 a year could still be included if they're the sole earner and have several children to provide for. More than two-thirds of JAM families have less than a month's income's worth of savings. They are especially vulnerable to weak income growth, rising costs and the freeze on working-age benefits until 2019. These families look set for a rise in incomes of just 2%, the equivalent of £300 over the decade to 2020, compared to 10% £3,100 for higher-income working-age households, said the foundation. Income inequality levels are expected to reach record highs by the early 2020s, the report warned. Sikh man's turban ripped off in racist attack outside Parliament, Resolution Foundation Director Torsten Bell said, this Parliament risks seeing the first sustained rise in income inequality since the 1980s. The story this time around is less about the rich soaring further away, and more about poorer families falling further behind as they bear the brunt of £14 billion of welfare cuts. It is policy decisions, not capitalism, that look set to drive living standards of low and middle-income families down and inequality up in the years ahead. Recent years of economic anxiety and political division should have taught us that this is the last thing Britain needs. The Foundation's calculations are based on the latest economic forecasts from the government's Office for Budget Responsibility along with policy impact assessments. It forecast that the pace of growth in average incomes will peak at 1.3% by 2022, well below the 2.1% before the financial crash of 2008. The Resolution Foundation says their projections could be fundamentally altered by the reversal of planned benefit cuts, funded by higher income taxes, the return of the earlier jobs boom, which petered out in 2017, a return to pre-crisis levels of pay growth and easing of pressures from private rents. Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell said, this report lifts the lid on the living standards crisis facing many working families in our country, and which Philip Hammond refuses to address. Some of the poorest in our communities have been forced to shoulder the burden of almost 8 years of Tory economic failure, and they need an urgent change of direction from the Chancellor next month at the spring statement. More low wages mean many parents are too poor to buy a winter coat for their children. More children of NHS, school and council staff living in poverty. More mum who regularly skips meals so her son, 3, can eat, says she feels helpless.